If a person's speaking with headphones on in front of a microphone, can they be heard if someone does not have their earbuds in? That's like the tree falling in the forest. Yeah. Yes, exactly. You know.
So this episode is sponsored by Quiet Time Kombucha.
Yes.
This is Mark's personal brand. He just started 1 minute ago.
Exactly. 1 minute precisely. Yes.
So what is Quiet Time Kombucha?
Well, it's a complex blend of raspberry and ginger root that has a effervescent flavor that just livens the taste buds for the morning and just quickens the rest of the body throughout the day.
And and does it enhance your quiet time as well?
It actually increases reflection ability.
Oh, very nice, very nice. I've actually had some of this Quiet Time Kombucha.
It is refreshing.
Pre-branded.
Yes, pre-branded.
And it was very good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Just our own little blend there.
Yeah, so if you'd like to buy a 12-pack, that would be $4.99 a bottle.
I need to know ahead of time. I only make six bottles a week. So 12 bottles, we'd have to ramp up production dramatically.
We probably won't be able to meet demand, so don't order it.
Like say.
You'll be disappointed in the production value. Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like how I see it, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one. So Mark, I'm dandy today. How are you?
I am very well, and I'm glad you're dandy, Justin. Yeah. I'm glad you remembered. Now you're doing it on your own. You did.
That's right.
You did.
Right. I'm trying to really Justinize this.
That's all right. We're going to have a hashtag dandy.
That's right. That's the goal. And then Quiet Time Kombucha.
There you go.
Be another hashtag.
Brought to you by Quiet Time Kombucha.
So now whenever you have
I'd have to bring out a different voice for that.
Let's hear.
Brought to you by Quiet Time Kombucha. That sounds a little...
Good sound effect. That was the wrong one.
That's okay.
We don't have a good one for that.
We'll work on it.
We'll workshop it.
Maybe not more today, but say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
And I'm glad you're dandy.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. What's your thoughts for the day?
My thoughts for today.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about a lot.
Oh.
No. So there's this.
We might talk a lot about a little bit too.
That's right. That's probably more accurate.
Okay.
We'll talk a lot about a little bit. Yeah. So there's this concept of what we call codependency in the recovery world. I want to talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Drop my pen.
That's all right. Yes,
and I'm back.
He's back.
Did you hear the 3D surround sound as I came to my mic?
Oh, I didn't notice it, but I noticed it more as you
demonstrated
what 3D surround sound.
Back to the topic. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all good.
I'm very distracted this morning.
So
I didn't have my quiet time.
I'm thinking about codependence in recovery. You said, is that what you? Yes.
Okay, so the reason I say that is because I've been so immersed in the recovery world for so long. I don't actually know how it touches in the rest of the world, like psychiatry and that kind of thing, and if the definitions over there are similar. But before I want to hear the rest of your thought there.
No, I just want to. It was just a question.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear more of that question. No, and then the other kind of edges of this topic would be enabling, as well as boundaries. So these are all kind of in a similar bucket of topics that touch on each other.
Sure.
So we anticipate that this may bleed into a second episode. Hey, maybe even a third.
Yeah.
But an ongoing conversation about all of these things. So back to you, Mark.
No, that's interesting. It's interesting that, this is my perspective here again.
We don't want to hear how you see it. Oh,
you don't?
Wait.
Well, I think from what I hear, it can sound, these names, these labels can sound more complicated than they really are.
Okay.
Because we have a lot of
especially codependency.
Codependency.
That's like such an amorphous blob of a term in recovery.
And enmesh, excuse me. No, I'm going to add another word.
Oh, no.
Enabling. Okay. But here's I know we routinely come back to continuums.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think they're helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna start off with a continuum that's gonna help us define this.
Awesome.
Okay.
He's got his hands in the air.
I got my hands in the
air. Right
air.
and left. Beginning the continuum.
I got my book and hands.
That's
okay.
Right.
Now picture in my right hand, this book, my right bookend. Okay. That's gonna be a term that I'm gonna call enmeshed.
Okay.
Okay. And for the sake of my left hand, I'm going to just go to there. And that's going to be isolation. Okay. So enmeshed, if we stop and think about that, it's going to look very much like a plate of spaghetti. Okay.
Yep.
Because,
Gotcha.
Or put your fingers together, intertwine your fingers. That's enmeshed.
I like the spaghetti. I'm gonna stick to spaghetti.
Well, it's a good analogy because I think you used the word that squishy. Some of these terms are squishy. It is like that plate of spaghetti. You just push against it, and it's like it moves, but yet everything moves all at the same time. You push a little bit here, it just kind of moves and absorbs, and
it's hard to know where one starts, one ends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, okay, I'm going to look at that word enmeshed, okay? And I think it fits for your addictions, that kind of thing. Enmeshed is to the point of my problems are your problems and your problems are my problems. They're, again, very much connected with codependency. Your happiness, my happiness is dependent upon your happiness. Those kind of things, to where there's very limited boundaries. Okay.
Yeah.
On the other end, of course, is isolation.
Is that where that's the one, dry noodle that fell on the floor and it's in the corner?
All by itself.
All by itself.
It's the one that got thrown to the wall to see if it stuck, and it fell to the floor and it stayed right there. Okay. It's no longer, it's just all dried up. And it's a good analogy for people who tend to live in isolation. Okay.
All dried up.
Just, because there
Didn't stick.
there's little connection. There's little ability to replenish myself.
Yeah.
And so I tend to, so these are the ends, if you will.
Those are the bookends, the right hand, the left hand.
And I think part of that is the process of, go ahead.
Sorry.
But isolation, I want to recognize, is, okay, I'm not connected to anybody. So,
You switch hands on me.
Yep, I did. I went to left because that was the spaghetti that fell to the floor. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's all dried up.
And that's the isolation.
That's the isolation. That's the person who, is the rock, is the island. They don't feel this.
Yeah.
They've just had enough of it all, and they want to just go. It's the woman at the well.
Yeah.
Living in isolation, just going, to the well at the middle of the day because she's drank from this well, that well, and it's all been dry. So I'm just living apart from everyone.
And that can also start, that can proceed from a life of that nature, or it can proceed from, we talking about enmeshment styles, like a certain upbringing can just cause you to be that way from the very beginning. Is that right?
Sure.
Isolated.
Yeah. Normally it comes out of a frustration or hurts.
Okay.
Those kind of things. It's like I've had enough, or I've just been, I think of, people who tend to avoid emotion because they just kind of grew up with emotions being bad. So I just kind of go to that, your IT guy, but that would be a good example of somebody who just says, okay, I want to kind of go to my own little world. I want to work I want to work, remote. I want to just spend my days apart from people because people just frustrate me. That kind of thing. Is that
what you think we do, Mark?
I know, but it's just one of those things. I know you have a desire to spend probably more time with people than apart from people, but your job, is that
I'm actually with people all day.
Sure. Yeah, if you call it that. Tell yourself that, Justin. Yeah.
We need to go back. What was that? The social media episode where we talked about if they're real relationships.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is a callback, folks.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of the continuum as usual because it very much says the opposite of the thing that's bad is not always good, right? Like if you go fly to the other side, then that's not necessarily good, which happens to be a great segue in terms of some of the things I've been thinking about with codependency.
Sure.
But I think before
and boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
To where.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I guess that's. Yeah. I was just thinking that through. Yeah. So, in codependent. Before we get there,
sure,
because I want to go there.
Yep.
Codependency and boundary.
You lead the way. I'll follow. He's making notes, folks.
Before
on his non-real notebook. Go ahead. Sorry.
It is a digital tablet, and that's why he says it's not real. I just to catch everyone up.
Yeah.
I think we need to define codependency. At least try.
Okay.
I want to hear yours first.
I would say, okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Pause. I am so squirrely this morning. I'm sorry.
I should have brought a little kombucha for you.
Maybe I had too much kombucha. I don't know,
maybe.
Pause, because I wanted to ask you, is there you've been in the Celebrate Recovery world for a little while now. You've experienced kind of our version of what codependency is, I think.
Sure.
Is it pretty much the same
as I see it?
Psychiatry? Is that a real thing over there?
I'd have to know your definition to compare it to my definition,
just
but I
your
see
understanding.
It as
okay.
Because see, I'm gonna basically, I'll make another continuum for the sake of codependence. What I would call enmeshed is going to be codependent. Mm-hmm. If I'm in my right hand, on my right hand again. On my left hand, okay, is independent.
Yep.
Okay.
The dried up noodle.
So it's the dried up noodle. And in the middle, okay, is going to be interdependent.
Yeah.
So I can learn to have relationship. I can be in relationship. And yet I know where you start and I stop. Enmeshed or codependent don't know where that line is. Mm-hmm. So it's too mingled together. There's limited boundaries. Yep. So your happiness is dependent upon my happiness and vice versa. That's codependent, to where interdependence is the ability to go to work and be, myself and, have autonomy. Mm-hmm. If you will, from my wife and from other people who are close to me. But I come back. I don't have to live in that isolation. I don't have to live that completely independent life, the whole John Wayne pick yourself up by your bootstraps type stuff.
Yeah.
And I can have this interdependence that says, okay, I have friends, I have supports, I have my family, and we support one another. And yet, if you get in trouble or if you do something that gets you in trouble, that's not necessarily my problem.
Yeah.
I'm willing to be a support. We can work through some of the details, but ultimately you got in trouble and now you're experiencing consequences, and it's not my job to make those consequences go away for you.
Yeah. And it'll be great to move into some examples too.
at some point. But as you talk about and as far as like, what does this look like in families or relationships? But before that, when you use the term interdependence, like Stephen Covey talks a lot about this concept of these concepts in the 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, when he talks about moving from independence to interdependence, and basically how dependence is the first state we arrive in this planet, right? Like we are completely dependent on our caretakers. We are unable to whatever. And the goal is to move to independence, to be able to, get on your bike and ride across town and buy yourself a soda,
Yeah.
I don't know if kids do that these days, that kind of thing. And then, but that's not the ultimate. The ultimate is to move into interdependence. And then he would say interdependence is where his buzzword synergy comes in. That's where you're able to do something that's more than the sum of the parts. So you plus me, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And he's saying when you put 2 people together, there's an opportunity for synergy. Synergy is a multiplicative effect.
Sure.
Where you plus me equals, a podcast, right? Where hopefully multiple people are impacted as a result of our, multiplied efforts here.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Synergy, right? So, but that's not possible without that interdependent nature. And I would argue on the codependent side, when you've gone past interdependence, where you're in complete, what do you call it? Enmeshed.
Enmeshed, yes.
It becomes almost impossible for synergy as well, where, our parts together create something that's greater than the sum of the parts. Instead, it's more likely that they start rubbing against, and like the sum of the parts is less than the sum of all the single, the parts.
Yeah.
And I think that's another good potential way to look at it and see signs of codependency. Say, when he and I are together, we don't create a better. We end up worse than when we're apart. And that can be a good sign of is there some codependence or enmeshment?
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
No, I'm in agreement with all that, and I like I appreciate the fact that you brought dependence in. And I think, in a lot of cases, when we put in front of that word, it's just adding to, it's just 2 people that are dependent on one another. It's 2 people that have found each other.
Yeah.
And, they need someone to depend upon. Yeah.
I've heard newcomers to the recovery world go, oh yeah, me and my wife, we're codependent, and they describe it almost in a loving way, like we can't live without each other. And you're like, I don't think you quite understand what codependence is, because that's that's not a sign of it, right? Like
no, and I think in our culture, codependence can seem very romantic.
Yeah, like the Bonnie and Clyde ride or die.
Yeah,
I can't live together.
I can't live
without you.
Sure,
undying love. Like when you are away, I'm pining. I can't do life without you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, but when we look at healthy relationship, we can recognize, okay, I enjoy life with you, but I can live without you. That's that ability to be interdependent in such a way that says, okay, when you go to work, I know you're going to work, and I'm not concerned about that you're someplace else, because you have demonstrated that that's what's happening. Now, I may have had people in the past, who have cheated on me or something along that line. So I have to call that into question, but that's where, I'm starting to create these boundaries around what people have done to me in my previous life versus not previous life, but, early on in life, in my past history, to this relationship, and that's where my hands come up, because I'm starting to define some of those boundaries, and I'm pulling them in from the extremes of right and left a little more to, where my shoulders are. And that's where you're able to, find that interdependence that says, okay, I enjoy being with you. And yet if we go away on vacation, 7 days is probably about as long as we want to be able to, be together.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be longing to have some independence again, where you do your things and I do my things, and that recharges us in such a way that we come back together better to be able to be interdependent, because I'm telling you about my day and you're telling me about what you experienced. And that's that synergy that basically the energy is able to flow from that emotional intelligence that says, hey, this is part of who I am, and I want you to know about it.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when a couple isn't able to have that because there's codependence, then it's, well, what'd you do that for? Why'd you do that? Really? And it takes on a negative tone versus a healthy tone that says, wow, tell me more.
Yeah.
Because I would call that, there's an insecurity, that is fostering that dependence, because, I don't know who I am without you. And that makes it tough just to be me.
Yep.
So that's kind of, and I think you were talking about examples, and I would say alcoholic families are a great example of enmeshed, because of course they have family secrets. We've done in the How We Love stuff, I've had couples, couples who have talked about their childhood, and the term public faces comes up, that process of who we are outside the home, and recognizing, well, you can't tell anybody about this. That's enmeshed, because at that point, my alcoholism is affecting my children in such a way that they can't say what's really going on. So my problem has suddenly become my child's problem, is my wife's problem. That's where that definition, your problems are my problems and my problems are your problems.
So even before we get to the examples, I'd like to explain the difference between the codependent and why don't we have a word for the other side of that? That's always bothered me.
The other side.
In recovery, we say the addict. We say the codependent and the addict. But, that's obviously very microscopic. Of course, codependency exists outside of addiction, right? Like
help me understand that.
So okay.
When you say an addict,
so often when we hear codependency and we're not aware of this is why we're doing this, because I'm sure a lot of people aren't privy to what that idea is. You think it's a two sides of the coin. So, or basically it's two people in the same situation. They're samely codependent.
Yep.
But in
There's
my
a relationship
experience and my understanding, they're not doing the same things to each other codependently. There is the codependent, the side that is what we call codependent, and then there's the addict, okay? So I'm going to define those two sides, and then you can let me know if that jives with your understanding of it
I'm
as
going to
well.
need you to do that.
Yes. So the codependent side is essentially the side that is covering, that is can't figure out how to do life without making sure you're okay. And so they do a lot of covering, they do a lot of enabling. In order to feel okay about themselves, they have to feel okay about you. And in order to feel okay about you, they have to cover for your transgressions, whatever they are. In an addict's case, it's, covering for their drinking, or sometimes even going to the store to get them a drink because they know that'll calm them down and that'll save face for certain things or whatever. Or just being afraid of that person and therefore continuing those cycles out of fear. But it's kind of that side of the coverer. Okay.
Yep. I gotcha.
Where the other side is the coveree. That's the one that's kind of the bull in the china shop, not realizing the damage that they're doing and or being, also being enabled to continue this behavior because it's always covered and it's always handled and taken care of. And so they can continue in that behavior. And so you can picture an alcoholic and his wife, or you can picture, a drug addict and his parents, you know, and that's a common dynamic where the parents are kind of trying to cover for, and it's all in the right intentions and all that. And this isn't about that. It's just drawing the lines. where the child is the addict and they're just continually slightly getting away with it, right? Like one way or another, because it's
maybe
covered.
not even slightly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, over time.
Yes. I say slightly, and what I mean by that is maybe completely, but not for a lifetime. They are going to experience significant pains, and what happens when you hold back the pains is that you are guaranteeing a much bigger pain at some point.
Sure.
And I think that's where, codependency becomes nefarious, like evil.
Sure.
Is like it's done in love and it's done in all these good intentions, but what you're actually doing is preventing the proper things happening at the right scale now.
Sure.
But anyway, so that's kind of where I would draw the lines. It's kind of the two sides. And
no, I appreciate
I'd like to
that.
hear your...
And I'll be honest with you, that's why I needed you to define. I would recognize that from my perspective initially, till we started talking a little more, I would see that as still codependent because each person has a role. Mm-hmm. One's a caretaker and one needs someone to take care of them. So, that cycle becomes codependent because what I believe on the other side, on the what you would label the codependent, okay, yes, they're the caretaker, but the addict needs someone to take care of them. Mm-hmm. Yep. So in that process, what the caretaker is saying is, I don't think you can take care of yourself.
Correct.
So the addict would say, you're right, I need you.
Right.
Until you try to create boundaries. Then I don't need you. I may have to find somebody else that's going to replace you.
Right.
Or
I'm left to deal with the consequences and health might happen.
Exactly. And that's where,
So it sounds like...
Go ahead. I'm going to view that as a cyclical dynamic.
So you're seeing codependency as basically this cloud above relationships.
Yep.
And it's kind of the covering.
Yes.
And I think that makes a lot of sense because, again, in my much more zeroed in understanding of it in recovery, I feel like no one's ever been that clear about what codependency is because we're always describing the parents and the alcoholic's wife. We're describing that enabling side when we talk about codependency in the recovery world. And I feel like that's where it gets confusing because it makes a lot of sense where codependency is kind of the relational description of the relational dysfunction. And what it was really true is that we actually need better definitions for both sides of that is what I think. You know?
And I'm thinking about even the caretaker, if you will. We could say the addict, but really from my perspective, the caretaker is addicted to taking care.
Yeah, so right. And in recovery, we very often say the both sides. How do they say it? Both sides are the same level of sick.
Yes,
it's just that the sickness bears out differently.
Right.
So yes,
and that's where healthy me, healthy us type stuff comes into play. The two healthy individuals who marry or have a relationship. Have a healthy relationship. Mm-hmm. But, to the degree that I have to have someone to take care of, I need a project. So I date projects or, then I'm automatically setting myself up to a certain degree for failure because I need somebody that has major issues to fix so that I feel better about myself being able to fix someone else.
Yep. Yeah.
So, I mean, but don't get me wrong. I appreciate your definition in that as far as, the addict and, the codependent, because I think, it is, but I see it as very cyclical.
Yeah.
In the sense of each person has a role and here again, I'm not an addictions counselor, licensed from that perspective, but my supervisor was. Okay. And, and she very much, and I think it's analogous to the pain that you mentioned earlier, to be a good addictions therapist, you have to, what she would refer to, you have to be able to light fires under people. because it is about creating that pain or, that recognizing the cost benefit type dynamic that helps people recognize their need for change. And I think, and that's what makes codependency so difficult is because neither one of us want to endure the pain that it takes to create change.
Right. Both sides.
Right. Yes.
Yep.
Because I can't deal with your anger long enough for the addict to go without whatever he needs.
Yep.
And that kind of thing.
And often a big enemy to change is fear, right? Like fear of the unknown or fear. Just fear. So that can often be a blocker as well.
Sure.
So let's, for the sake of the rest of the discussion, let's just say codependency is the relational dynamic that covers both.
Sure.
And then as far as terms go, we're going to call this side the codependent.
Sure.
Okay. And this side the addict.
Okay.
But you can swap those out for someone who's not an addict, but let's just use those terms because I think I need a shared language, Mark.
That's okay. I'm able to go with that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or unless you have better terms.
No, I'm good with that.
You can say this side is the strawberry.
That's going to be a little confusing, I'm afraid.
Right.
Sounds more like fruit punch.
It does. And this is not a fruity situation. So
no, not at all.
You're pointing.
No, that's good. Did I point?
Like you were going to say something.
No, I appreciate the need for that definition.
Yeah, because so we can proceed forward. So, because examples, for instance, if we're going to give some examples, and we already started in on some, but it'd be good to kind of say the sides of that. But again, I know the parental relationship to an addict is a good example of that, where the codependent side would be the parents and the addict side would be the child.
Sure.
And I've had a lot of discussions about that specific thing over the many years, and one thing I've found is that it's nearly impossible to. It's just so hard to tell parents to do tough love because you know what you're asking them. You see it in their eyes, you see it in their reactions, you see it in their defensiveness. You're asking me to take a knife and stab it into my child's chest. That's what you're asking me to do. You know what I'm saying?
That can be the way they see it.
Yes.
Yes, very much so.
And I'm going all the way to their side, and I'm saying this is what it is to them. This is what you're asking me to do.
Yeah.
And on your side, you're like, that's what they're seeing, whatever. And on our side, it's easy. But at the same time, until we can, there's no way they're going to take any kind of counseling until you can kind of see how extreme it is what you're asking them to do from their perspective.
Sure.
And then do the work to, I guess, dismantle those perceptions. But in some cases, it's a recent conversation is about a child with mental health struggles. And in that case, some of the boundaries that I feel like would be healthy in that relationship, I can see how they potentially could be that knife stabbing.
Sure.
If that child receives a boundary and therefore does something to hurt himself, how do you not, as a parent, perceive it as I just took a knife and stabbed it in my child's chest? You know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's where, we're not that far removed from an addict where they're saying, I know if I stop paying for his school, he's going to just slip into this crowd. He's going to get out of all the good influences he has. And then in that case, like the mortality rate of the type of environment I see him slipping into is very high. You might as well ask me to stick a knife in his chest.
Sure.
Right? So I don't think it's that far off to say that.
No, I hear you.
And I think it's important to understand how difficult of an ask it can be in in a lot of circumstances. And I think that's important for counselors. I think it's important also for just friends.
Sure.
Like people hopefully listening to this podcast going, I know someone like that, and I think they're stupid for paying for their kid's school or whatever that situation is. And it's like, yeah, but you need to understand what's at stake here.
Sure.
Especially in their mind.
And I think so often it doesn't matter what other people think. I think, we get caught up in that at times. But yeah, what would you say to that parent who's facing that knife thrust type?
I mean, the first
dynamic?
thing that I say is, holy crap, I see how hard this is. You know
sure,
what I mean? I guess
sure.
that's kind of the point I'm making. Like, we can't just hand wave it away and say, well, trust us, this is better for your child.
Sure.
And, the stuff we were saying earlier, like, it takes time to get to those points of saying, listen, what you're doing now is actually less loving.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing now, you perceive as the most loving thing. I'm giving of myself in so many ways that hurt me but benefit my child. That is the very definition of love. But I will often come back to say, like, what is love? Love is wanting the best for someone and doing what I can to produce the best. And in this case, the best is not to keep them from the consequences of their actions. Because what you're doing is guaranteeing a much larger consequence in the future.
Sure.
Like, it's a guarantee. You cannot maintain this forever.
Sure.
The nature of addiction or dependency is that it is accumulative, right? Like,
It's a propping.
It's propping.
Yeah, I'm holding up. In other words, I'm propping up, and now I have to prop over here, and I have to prop over here to where we have a house of cards type thing, holding an individual up.
Yeah.
So if one thing happens, eventually the whole thing tumbles down, and then what?
Yeah, and an addiction specifically has diminishing returns. So,
Sure.
The nature of their struggles is only going to grow. And so the consequences to the growth of that, the growing nature of that, only become greater and greater. So if you don't allow them to experience 2 nights in jail from, a little bit of weed or whatever, and you bail them out quickly because you want to cover for that, and you want to make sure it doesn't ruin their reputation, and they can still get into schools and all this stuff.
You don't understand.
You don't understand that there is potential. What you're doing is guaranteeing 30 years in prison. Right? And I think that's the empathy comes first.
Sure it does.
And you slowly get to this side of saying, listen, what you feel like is most loving can actually be the most evil and covered in love, which is the worst kind of evil.
No, I hear you.
And that's not your intention.
Yeah.
But that is what, if you believe in a creator and you believe in the opposite, like the roaring lion who's, creeps around seeking to devour and destroy. Sure. Like his best tactic is to take evil things and cover them in beauty.
Sure.
Right? The wolf in sheep's clothing, whatever. And so, like, if you feel like you're being loving, but are actually the results of what you're doing is the opposite of love, like you're guaranteeing a worse, future for your child. And again, all these circumstances are also above us. Like, we cannot guarantee the destruction of someone else, and we cannot guarantee the opposite.
Health.
The growth.
Growth. Positive
blessings.
Sure.
Of someone else.
Yeah.
Like, ultimately, we believe in a higher power, and we believe that there is something between you and them that can intercede.
Sure.
But I'm saying, in the context of understanding our relationship and our roles in the relationship, there's tremendous power there. And without that, God's intervening, which I've seen him do a lot in being around recovery for so many years. I've seen him intervene where if it wasn't for this car accident or this person who came out of nowhere or, and spoke into their life, whatever that thing was, that intervening circumstance, the natural course of the enabling relationships in their life would have put them in prison, death, whatever, right? And that's part of their testimony. Like, I was this close, or, I was on the way to whatever. And, so that's certainly possible. I just want to add that. But without those things, it's just important to understand that, like, your actions as an enabler can guarantee the destruction of the person you're trying to protect.
Sure.
And that's...
So I'm thinking about that in the context of your average parent, just your average parent, 8, 10, 12-year-old child. Think about that that relationship. Excuse me.
Need some water?
No, I'm good. Think about that relationship. I mean, a little bit. Think about that relationship with the couple you mentioned and translate that back 10, 12 years to that 8-year-old, 10-year-old child. Where does that start? What is that
Yeah.
impetus, if you will?
Yeah.
And what, as parents, what is one of those things that you think we need to be mindful of?
This is where I like to go back to your continuum, and that becomes a handy demonstration again, because not every child is the same, and not every parent is the same, and
Sure.
some parents naturally parent in a way that triggers isolation. Like, I'm
Okay.
afraid of
Sure.
your consternation, and therefore I separate from you.
Yeah, go to your room till
Right.
you get it figured out.
Right. Or just their disapproval is so overbearing that you self-separate. Like you...
Shame.
Yeah. Yep.
Shame
Yep.
parenting.
Yep. Shame parenting. Yep. And then the other side, obviously, is the, oh, you're perfect and it's okay, you messed up and you can't do anything wrong. So there's a continuum there. And somewhere in the middle, it depends on your kid's needs, and it depends on how you are as a parent, and it's hard to... But yeah, if you... I like... again, Stephen Covey has an example of his own struggle with as parents, as his kids grew, and how one of his kids was a natural athlete and one was not. And the one that wasn't, they would always kind of cover for him, like, oh, he's just, he's a little bit shorter, and kind of publicly to other people and publicly to him, kind of try and make him feel better. And what they realized is, okay, we're teaching him something here. We're teaching him that he's less than.
Sure.
And that he's, all these things.
Because he's not the other son.
He's not the other son, yeah.
Sure.
And his capabilities don't align even with some of the other kids that aren't their son. It's just like, clearly he's... And so we're teaching him that this is true, that you're less than. And number two, that you have to be covered for. And so he talked a lot about how they had to learn the lessons to let him be who he was and not apologize for it. And say, like, you're not as good as your brother. That's okay. You're actually really good at this other thing. And also, if you work really hard, you could be better than your brother. It's not a limitation that because you're not as good at the same age as he was, it might mean that you work harder and you end up further down the road than he does. That's up to you,
Yeah, hard work trumps natural ability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And but that was just an example that came to mind where that's like way early, right? Like that's like before they're starting to do dysfunctional things, but we can start breeding this, it's breeding grounds for this codependent cycle in the relationship where they need you as a parent, in unhealthy ways. But as a parent, it doesn't feel unhealthy at all. Like this is what parents do. You cover, you protect, you you do all these things. The problem is, it's not always healthy, and there does come a time where you would cover, you don't anymore, and learning that is supremely difficult. And I think that's the work to be done, is figuring that out. And I mean, I can speak from my own experience. Like my oldest is 15. And, if she doesn't want to do a thing we think she should do, it's been our course of action generally to do one of two things: either force her to do it and say, you have to do it because you're our daughter and this is what you're going to do, or not force her to do it and shame her for it. And kind of say like, okay, we're not going to make you do it, but we're disappointed that you're not willing to obey and do this and do the thing,
Yeah.
And I think, I'm slowly trying to learn how to do it differently, and I don't know what the right path is, but I feel like the next course is essentially to let her do it and make her clear what I feel about it. But you're your own person, and you need to make your own choices and experience the consequences of those choices. One of those consequences is that I will be disappointed that you're not doing what I want you to do.
Sure.
And that can come with a chain consequences where because you didn't do the thing I wanted you to do, well, if you're not willing to, obey in a sense this thing, then why would I let you do this other thing, right?
Sure.
Like, so there's ongoing consequences that come with your choices, but ultimately your choices are your own and you're going to experience those consequences,
Sure.
And differentiation, I guess, I'm probably destroying that term, but like,
Yeah.
Your choices are your own and your consequences your own, and my relationship to you is also distinct in that I will how I respond to you is on my side, and I might be disappointed or I might have consequences in the future for this or whatever, but
Sure.
it's I don't know if that.
Well, I like your use of the word consequences. And I think it's important to be able to delineate there's two types of consequences.
Okay.
There's natural and logical. Okay. So logical are the ones that I develop out of a sense of discipline. Okay. If you don't do this, this will happen. Okay. If you don't clean your room, you don't get to go to your friends on Friday night.
When you say logical,
In other words, it's a thought up. It's
manufactured.
Manufactured.
Natural and manufactured.
No, not the same.
Natural. I'm
yes.
saying
Okay, I see what you're
manufactured
saying.
is my version of what you said. Logical.
Yep.
It's the created.
And natural are the things that happen naturally. If I don't, realistically, if I don't pay my taxes, I may lose my home. If I continue to drive at a certain rate of speed, over the speed limit, I'm going to get a ticket. It's a natural consequence for continually doing something. And I think the other part that brings to mind is sometimes I think when I'm working with families in that dynamic you talk about, I'm not sure, or it seems as if parents in that situation don't necessarily stop to think about there will come a day when they can no longer do what they are doing.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a difference too, to recognize, okay, in that process of propping up, in that process of, supporting what happens when you pass away, who's going to do that role? And isn't it better now for you to start, even though it's difficult, isn't it better for you to start this process while you're still able and available and, you can be a part of it versus just basically letting this whole house of cards fall down. And then
because you're unable to,
your child is just, like you're saying, far worse than they would have been before.
I also think too that the dynamic of that relational dynamic, the codependent cycle, is such that it causes a narrowing of focus. So it is almost impossible to think those thoughts.
Sure.
Out, it's like you're just in the cycle. You're just.
Well, you need somebody else.
It's the ping pong, right? Like, okay, now I have to solve for this problem. Ding, it's back. Okay, now I have to solve. And it's like you're just thinking about the next problem in front of you, and it's very difficult, I think, to zoom all the way out without that help, that helpful perspective to say, let's pause for a second. And then that's, again, counseling is so important. Objective perspectives, Celebrate Recovery, we talk a lot about that, and kind of the open share environment is where when someone across the room is talking about their own woes in their own family, it's able to do the same thing. It allows me to unlock something in my brain that goes, oh, this is me. And it allows you to kind of think outside of, yourself or whatever. So I think having those inputs in your life are very, very important if you're stuck in that dysfunctional cycle.
Sure.
Because asking you to just think bigger, long term is really, really difficult because you're just trying to solve the next problem.
Sure.
Both sides of that dysfunction, right?
Yeah. And I like the analogy you used with your friend there, Stephen Covey, as far as his kids go, because I think a lot of what happens, we grew up with a certain parenting style. So therefore, our tendency is to use that parenting style with our kids.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we know that shame-based parenting, parents who use shame-based parenting, their children have a higher rate of addiction, you know, and addictive behaviors than, because there's this ability, it tends to lend towards this isolation and secrecy. I'm going apart because I'm doing things in secret or around you because I don't want to have to deal with that shame that I hear that I don't measure up. And it's like, so often we have to be able to separate the identity from the action.
Yeah.
Because so often, the action, as if I'm from my parenting dynamic, your action is a reflection upon my identity as a parent.
Yes.
And that's a tough thing.
That's where the spaghetti is a real thing. Because it's like, I can't see how your reputation is different than mine.
Yes.
And that comes right back to what I was saying about Mia. Like, I'm having that hard thing right now. Like, if she doesn't go do the thing we want her to do, that will reflect badly on me. Like, I'm a bad parent who doesn't, or whatever. And I'm like, you know what? Whether it does or doesn't, by some person's perception, isn't true. Like, and that doesn't make me a good parent. I'm just saying, like, their perception of, I'm surprised I didn't make, their kid's not here, or whatever that thing is, or, their kid isn't so perfect because they won't do this thing that, or whatever. And I fear that, consternation or whatever. And you know what? I have to learn to be like, she's not a reflection of me completely. She is in some sense. I guess that's where it gets fuzzy as parents, right? Like, there is a continuum, a gradation of, they're completely reflections of me when they're a baby, and then slowly it should become less and less, and they become their own person. And on the other side, right, like they're completely distinct from me, and I accept that. They accept that. Everyone around accepts that. So there's the two ends, and somewhere in the middle, you're growing in that differentiation. I'm going to keep using that word, but that's probably not how you would use it. But it's difficult.
But there's a graph basically that describes what you're saying. And if you think about it, like, make the L with your hand, and in the lower, what would be my left corner, is going to be at the bottom going across at the, what's that, X and Y, right? Y is the top. Yeah. X-axis is right
lateral.
to left. Yep. So horizontal is going to be age. So start that out at 0 and then you go up. Okay.
Yep.
But on the Y-axis going up is going to be responsibility.
Yeah.
So a parent for a child at 0 is going to start out at that bottom with 100% responsibility.
Yeah, and there's two dots. One is the parent, one is the child.
Well, it's the same graph. So as the child ages, which is going to happen, it's the X.
Yep.
As they age, you want to equip them to where your responsibility goes down.
Right. And theirs goes up.
And as they age, they take on more responsibility. So if I have a 5-year-old and I'm still 100% responsible for them, I'm not giving them age appropriate chores or things like that, that's going to likely continue on in ways that are unhealthy into 10, 12, 15, 55, that kind of thing, to where ultimately around, at a certain point, I want them to be 50-50, I want, around 18, or even less than that. So that, I think that's a helpful visual at times. It's like, how am I equipping my child to eventually take responsibility for all of their own behavior and operate in a healthy autonomy? And I think, that's kind of what you were describing, in that process of, as, we age and responsibility. And from that perspective, I realize it's going to have to be for, not necessarily all today, but I'm recognizing, I think that's where boundaries come into play.
Yes.
And I think I even had a conversation with Lizzie about this the other day. I think so often we want to look for formulas. Okay. This and this
I feel like
equals
you should
this.
Save this.
Well, for another time.
Yeah, I
well,
feel
fair
like.
Enough.
Well, I just feel like we reached a really good, natural bookend to this, because
That is good
I do
bookend.
think this is a good conversation to extend to multiple things. And I think talking about we've covered codependency pretty well. And
Okay,
defined
I hear
some
you.
examples and defined some terminology to where I think the natural next progression would be talk about boundaries.
We'll
and
leave
I
it as a cliffhanger.
that's right. Dun dun dun. What's a boundary, folks? It's a cliff.
With one end
Which
knocked
is
off.
funny because sometimes that's how people create boundaries, is they create a cliff. Or,
Sure, cutoffs.
So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
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 Because I think there's a bajillion ways to do boundaries, and it's a continuum of healthy to unhealthy, right?
Sure.
And
Well, I think it's that middle ground again between two extremes. But yes,
that's what I mean. But there's a
defining that.
continuum of how you can do
Yep.
a boundary that is good, or bad over here and bad over here. And,
Exactly. Yeah.
you get that.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing, Justin. I appreciate the. I'm gonna have a little better insight of where the topic comes from.
That's right.
This has been something you've been wrestling with
Yes.
in multiple ways. So yeah, appreciate you bringing some of that experience to the microphone for the rest of us to benefit from.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation next time.
Sounds
which
good.
will be for us recorded in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
because
at least.
next week
We're doing an interview.
Special guest.
Yeah.
It's been a minute since we had a guest, so we're
So, yeah.
excited about doing that again.
Yeah.
Maybe y'all could just say a little prayer that we don't have any technical difficulties for once.
Yeah. Well, that's part of growth. We learn from them.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited. This will be our first guest with our new
System.
equipment and,
Yeah.
and setup. So we'll have to. Yeah.
Well, all right, folks. This is how we see it.
I just saluted Mark. You couldn't see that. But. Okay, bye.
I saluted back. Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations.